Now let's talk about the impact it has on your business. Obviously, it's very difficult to find an ROI on being a guest on someone else's podcast or even doing your own podcast. What kind of results have you seen, even if it's subjectively speaking?
It's very hard to measure.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't believe you should expect to see a lot of extra leads or trials or whatever your direct effect is, unless you have something like a tool that everybody can use and it's immediately picked up and you don't need to replace another system and stuff. In our case, it's a CRM. It's not like there's some people that hear me on a podcast and are like, "Oh, this might be interesting for us." Yeah. It happens, but it's definitely not with the bulk of the listeners. I see it more as a brand building exercise, and that's extremely hard to measure. I don't even know how I would start with that.
Welcome to the Show Me the Data podcast by LeadSet, where every week we get marketing and sales leaders from fast-growing B2B tech companies to share specific tactics they use to drive revenue for their business. The best part, they share the exact metrics and data points behind each of their tactics. I'm your host, Tukan, co-founder and CEO of LeadSet. See you there.
Hello, everyone. My guest today is Jeroen Corthout, CEO at Salesflare. Welcome to the show, Jeroen.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So to begin with, Jeroen, what will be super helpful is if you can tell everyone, what do you guys do at Salesflare?
In very short, we offer a CRM, which is customer relationship management software, which is essentially, if you would ask most of our customers, like the end users, it's like to follow up their leads and customers in a better way, and in that way build better relationships. Like they disappoint their customers less, they follow up at the right moments with always the right amount of information and all that. Mm-hmm. And it's a system that helps you do that. And why we started Salesflare is because we saw that of all the CRMs we tried to work with, it never really worked for us because the software always came with this expectation that we would fill it out completely and that we were this extremely disciplined people that would input every single thing we did and every single new person that we met and everything all the time. And we just figured that is unrealistic. And we couldn't keep up with it. And we honestly don't believe anyone can.
Yeah.
So then we started thinking and we saw that actually most of the things we're inputting into the CRM, they are already in our mailbox or our calendar or our phone or in social media or a company database or some tracking somewhere. And if we could just build a system that pulls it all together, offers it to us, suggests like, hey, it seems like you just met that person, you want to add them to that company. Sure. This kind of style, that would help us tremendously because a system that doesn't work for us just doesn't feel like it's ever going to work. And that's the idea based on which we started Salesforce 7 years ago. Nowadays, it does this kind of stuff. And we have over 2,000 companies actively using the system to achieve these goals. So we're super happy with that.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Anytime you mention CRM, the first thought that comes into mind is there are these massively large established players in the system, namely Salesforce, HubSpots of the world. How do you manage to compete with them?
Yeah, Salesforce is relatively simple in the sense that they're not really well established with small companies. They try, but their software used to be for small companies a very, very long time ago, and then they moved completely up market and made something that is really not super useful for small companies. These are not aimed at the end user. It's expensive. The way you buy it is also not really modern when it comes to towards small companies. HubSpot is a bit more of an issue in the sense that HubSpot really aims at medium-sized to small companies, more medium-sized than small. And for us, it's a bit the other way around, like small to medium-sized. Mm-hmm. They have a free CRM, which seems free, but then of course, if you want to have the same functionality as you get in our system, you need to get the Sales Hub as well, which then immediately makes it extremely more expensive. But that's hard to see at first. Another complication is that they earn, and I saw even the earnings report yesterday, they earn about 10K per customer per year, which is, let's say, in the order of 10 times more than we earn per customer. So that makes that they can spend an inordinate amount of money promoting their software, with ads being on top of every list, all the paid stuff.
Yeah.
And everything is really skewed towards who pays the most. I think it's a general rule in the world, probably, but so that makes it hard. But what we try to do is to compete on stuff that are harder to compete on, things that you cannot just scale easily with money, where it takes a little bit more, and that is things like building better software, of course, building better relationships with clients. That especially is much easier for us as a smaller scale organization, where everybody knows the software really well, and there's no tons of layers between people. We can build really tight customer relationships, and help customers really well. But then also on things like when it comes to marketing, it's, for instance, creating quality content, which is hard to do if you constantly hire copywriters at scale. It's much easier when you sort of work on a smaller scale with more like experts, or when it comes to doing things like booking podcasts. It's actually relatively easy to scale, but it doesn't look like it. So that's why it's not extremely exploited yet, and there's still space for us to do something there.
I love it. So I guess let's talk a little bit about the whole podcasting strategy. So one of the things that you mentioned to me earlier was that you have taken this being a guest on a podcast approach to reach out, to build a brand and just get the word out. Tell us a little bit more about, first of all, how many podcasts have you been since
I just
started this?
Counted, and we started about exactly a year ago, and this is podcast number 174. At least that is being recorded. I think we have about 150 live now.
Okay, so that's it. That's incredible. So that's close to 15 podcast recordings a month that you've been doing. Now the first question that I want to ask you is, what was the main objective for you to do this exercise?
Yeah. So what we found is that it's we do a lot towards our own audience, which is nice. But of course, we are not huge, and we don't have a huge audience. I mean, we pull quite some people onto our blog, and we have relatively large amount of customers, but it's nothing compared to the total market. So we figured that one of the things we should do, next to all the things we do for our audience, is getting outside and create visibility towards the rest of the world, basically.
Yeah.
So we started looking at a bunch of things that we could do, and coincidentally, we really started working on this last year, and then the pandemic came. So in the beginning, there was a ton of online conferences and webinars and stuff.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of those. But then at some point, that kind of stopped. Plus, the thing we felt is that it takes a lot of time to do those. And it doesn't necessarily pay off much. Like, the amount of people that come to a webinar or an online conference is usually rather limited. I think the best event I've done was a predictable revenue event.
Yeah.
In May last year or so.
Yeah.
And I think about 500 people attended. There were like 2,000 people registered and 500 attended. And that was like the top of the top.
Yeah.
It did like require some preparation though, because I had to make the whole presentation and get used to it and stuff. And And in the end, it didn't really feel like it made a huge impact. Now, with podcasts, we've sort of found the opposite. Not saying that we'll get to the impact measurement.
Yeah.
This is extremely hard. But with podcasts, what we do is we book those, which does not take a lot of time. First, we make a list, which is scraping. That doesn't take more than half a day, let's say, in total. Then my colleague Carrie, she goes through the list of podcasts and actually checks them one by one.
So
And sees whether there's a match. Yeah.
just to interrupt there, Jeroen. So we let's unpack that piece a little bit. So with the podcasting strategy, your main goal is to create brand awareness, leverage other people's audiences, get there, and it's a relatively low investment
Correct.
activity. And the first thing that you said is you basically go ahead and create a list of podcasts to go after.
Yeah.
How does that work? Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah. The best way to get lists is listennotes.com. It's a
There are
search
podcast
engine for
search engine.
podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can also filter on podcasts there and stuff. So if you go on there, it's relatively easy to create relevant lists.
Okay.
Now, coming back to what I then said, they're not necessarily relevant. I mean, they're more relevant than you would just email random podcasts or something.
Yeah.
But what we do as a step in between, because we saw that at some point we were pulling more like, that was actually before we found Listen Notes. We did something, I think on SparkToro, we pulled a list based on our audience and stuff. And we didn't really check who we were emailing. And then there were some really awkward matches in there. So from there, we figured like, okay, if we're going to reach out to someone, we actually need to believe that there's a fit. If you email like, hey, there might be a fit, then we need to believe that. So right now, there's a manual step in between, which is really my colleague Carrie checks all of them one by one to see whether there is a fit, like whether the topic makes sense for us, but also whether it is something that I can say something about. Because if I have nothing to add, I'm not going to get on a podcast, obviously.
Okay. So you search on Listen Notes for podcasts related to sales, marketing, growth, those kind of things.
Entrepreneurship, startups, stuff.
Startups. Okay. And from there on, do you rank them based on their audience score or something like that?
We started filtering them out based on that. So on Listen Notes now you see listen scores.
Okay.
And they based on the listen score, they give a ranking. They say this is a top 10% podcast, 5%, 2.5%, 1.5%, stuff like that.
Okay.
And because there were so many, and we like to be a bit more selective now.
How big is the universe of podcasts like that you have found that you can potentially reach out to?
If we wouldn't filter, it would be well over 10,000 podcasts. I think. Maybe 20. We already in Listen Notes before we pull a list. We already filtered down very hard. One of the things that is important to check, and that's a filter you can put on Listen Notes, is whether they're still active.
I see. Yeah.
I think right now we're only pulling those that have been active in the last month.
Okay.
Reaching out to podcasts that are dead doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Okay. So you filter, you get a list of people that are active, that are around the topics of interest, and then you manually filter just to make sure that these are the right kind of podcasts where you can say something of interest, of value.
Yeah.
And what's the process there on? So you mentioned that one of your colleague manages this process, correct? Mm-hmm. And does she then find out the podcast hosts, their contact details, and
that's actually in the Listen Notes page if you get the premium plan.
Okay.
And then the email address, which every podcast has an email address linked to their RSS feed.
Yeah.
Because every podcast has an RSS feed, which is then used to be pulled into platforms.
Yeah.
And we just email that email address.
Got it.
Um,
And is that the primary outreach that your team does to via email? Like there's an email outreach that goes in?
So we have in our own software, Salesflare, we have workflows, which is like email sequences, a bit more advanced. But and we send a sequence to people in there, and the first email is basically I can read it sort of for you.
Sure.
It says, "Hi, first name or CEO Jeroen at Salesflare, the number one CRM and product hunt, is reserving some time in the coming weeks to talk on podcasts." Actually, the whole year, but I've had a close look at, and then the name of the podcast. And as far as I can tell, he seems like a good fit. It's actually true. She had a good look. Are you the right person to talk to about this, or is there someone else in your team I should get in contact with?
Nice. So you have an email sequence, like there are 2-3 emails that would go out to the email?
It's actually 4 emails.
4 emails. And what kind of conversion do you see? Like of the people, how many people reach out? How many people do say yes?
So we reached out so far to 1,259 podcasts.
Okay.
And we had 48% of those replying.
Oh, wow. And obviously out of the 48%, I mean, 10% of them have already, 25% now out of that 400 or 500 have already have had you as a guest.
So it's 1,259 and half of that is like 630. So it's about 1/4 of that, a bit more that we actually booked.
Nice. That's awesome. Okay. So now the next question that I have is, how much time does it take for someone to be doing this? Like, is this person doing this full time, the podcast outreach on your?
No. I mean, the outreach itself is automated.
Yeah.
And that part is so where most of the time is it's in the filtering. It's actually making sure that it's good podcasts to be on. But that makes sense, because if you don't do that, you're gonna first annoy a lot of people, and secondly also have a lot of extra work.
Sure.
Because the rest of the work is in getting emails, replying to them, applying to podcasts. Often podcasts also have forms that you have to fill out. Then sometimes booking right away, sometimes with a booking link. Then in between, I often still have to get on intro calls. Like we did an intro call together. That's about in half of the podcasts, I would say, they want to have an intro call.
Sure.
And then the rest for me is basically getting on the call, talking. You and I now do half an hour, and it's literally half an hour of my time.
Yeah. And on an average, how much time do you spend yourself as the CEO on being on podcast on a weekly basis?
I haven't measured it, and also greatly varies depending on whether Carrie did another batch, as we call it, or not. Some weeks I do, some days I do 3 or 4.
Oh wow!
Yesterday I did 0.
So
it depends.
And do you have like a specific day assigned to record podcasts, or no?
Not right now, but
no,
it would probably be a better idea. The thing is, we're in Belgium, and a lot of the podcasts are US based, which then immediately means that it's all end of day stuff for me.
Yeah.
So usually the ends of my days is getting on podcasts.
Okay, that's not too bad. Cool. So now let's come to the final thing. Is so you're doing this, obviously this whole process of selecting podcasts and then reaching out and then booking is working great for you. Now let's talk about the impact it has on your business. Obviously it's very difficult to find an ROI on being a guest on someone else's podcast or even doing your own podcast. What kind of results have you seen, even if it's subjectively speaking?
It's very hard to measure. First of all, I don't believe you should expect to see a lot of extra leads or trials or whatever your direct effect is, unless you have something like a tool that everybody can use and it's immediately picked up and you don't need to replace another system and stuff. In our case, it's a CRM. It's not like there's some people that hear me on a podcast and are like, "Oh, this might be interesting for us." It happens. But it's definitely not with the bulk of the listeners. I see it more as a brand building exercise.
Okay.
That's extremely hard to measure. I don't even know how I would start with that.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you,
and
well, would you track then how many listens on a podcast times the number of podcasts, like average, like, would you do anything like that? It's like these many people actually heard of the name Salesflare and my story through all my podcasts.
I can do that and have a number, but what does it mean to me? I don't know.
Yeah.
We already select in the amount of listeners on podcasts nowadays. At least the listen score, as far as I understand, is an amount of listens per month for the podcast, not necessarily per episode.
Yeah.
So podcasts that do more episodes have a higher listen score if they have the same amount of listeners per episode.
Yeah.
But I don't think adding a score there really is going to add value for us. We tried to hit a number of visibility events, as we call it, per month. And we're hitting that quite. We are overshooting it every month. Let's say.
What do you mean by a visibility event?
Yeah, like a podcast or a conference, webinar. Those are all things outside our own audience, which is what we're trying to do. Yes, that the podcasts are way easier and more efficient.
Yeah.
Than the other types.
Okay.
But you were asking for measurable stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Backlinks is probably the only thing that's measurable.
Yeah.
We get a lot of backlinks from podcasts, like usually in the speaker notes. There's a link to our website.
That's absolutely there. Yeah.
Often I mention also stuff that I've written in some article, and then they put that in the speaker notes as well. And that way we also get backlinks to specific articles, not just to our homepage.
Yeah, the product hunt article that you mentioned is amazing. No, this is great. So you spend roughly what, like 3-4 hours at least every week being on podcasts. Do you think it's the best use of your 3-4 hours, or as a CEO, you think it could have been better spent somewhere else, based on what you're seeing here?
It's a bet. I think it's probably worth it, but it's hard to say.
Yeah, to be decided, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is going back to the first question then, Jeroen, is this is part of that strategy where you are competing with other giants that can throw money at it. You are trying to take guerrilla approaches that are relatively inexpensive and still reaching an audience that they are not in a more authentic way.
Correct.
Understood. This is great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jeroen. This is great. I appreciate you sharing all the insights. I learned quite a few interesting things and hacks. I'm pretty sure our audience will too. All the best with Salesflare, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. This was fun.
Thank you. Thanks.